Hi guys! In this tutorial, I will guide you through all of the steps of turning this simple image into a modern art portrait. So, let's begin. I'll begin by duplicating my background layer by pressing Ctrl J. And this is the layer where I'm going to remove all of the blemishes on the skin. I will select the spot healing tool and I will begin cleaning up the skin. I now will clean up the scratches on her hand. She got these scratches from her cat, so I'm just going to clean that up. And I'm still using my spot healing tool. I'll go to the other hand and there's more scratches to clean. Just clean up a bit of the hair on the face. Sometimes it's best to zoom into the image and reduce the size of the brush when you're trying to remove it. I'm just going to go quickly over all of the strays that are on her face. Okay, so now I've completed removing all the blemishes. I'm going to change my layer's name to blemishes, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I will call that stray hair. And that's where I'm going to be removing all the hair that's sticking out, that's looking out of place. And I'm going to be using the spot healing tool. And I'll probably alternate between this and the clone tool. So I noticed this strand of hair that's stuck on the sleeve of her dress. I don't like how it looks, so I'm just going to remove that. Using the clone tool for this at 100% opacity and flow at 50%. Just try and get as much of it as I can. I'll now create a new layer to fix her dress. I'll rename it Fix Dress. And I'll start by using the patch tool. I'll just go over the creases on the dress that I want to remove. I'm not removing all of the creases or wrinkles on the dress, only the ones that I feel don't look good and just need to be removed. So I'm just going to keep going over the areas that I want to fix. And yep, that looks good. Now I'm going to create my frequency separation. I'll create 2 layers by pressing Ctrl J. I will rename the lower layer low frequency / color, my top layer high frequency / texture. And now I'm going to group them and call that frequency separation. So I'll go to the texture layer and turn that off, and then go back to the color layer, go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, bring the slider all the way down, and slowly go up the slider, increase it to 5.5 pixels and press OK. Now go back to the texture layer, switch that on and go to image, apply image, and in the layer section go to low frequency. Change the blending to subtract, opacity at 100%, scale at 2, offset at 128 and hit OK. Now change blending mode to linear light. I will now select the clone tool, change the opacity to 50%, leave the flow at 100%, and I will start sampling the areas that I would like to clone. Making sure that current layer is selected in the sample section. So I noticed this area over her nose is a bit overexposed. So what I'm going to do before I continue to clone the area is create a curves layer and increase the contrast by bringing down the curve. Yeah, that looks better. Now I continue my cleanup. Okay, so this step is done. I will look at the before and after. It's looking really nice. I will go to the color layer, select the lasso tool, change my feathering to 20 pixels. I will draw a selection around a large skin area. Go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and bring up the slider of the radius all the way up to where it's looking nice and smooth. 15 is always good. Let's look at the before. Yeah, that's looking really good. Again, yep, perfect. I'm happy with that. Now I'll draw other selections. Just move that a bit. And I always use the shortcut Control F. That usually just makes my workflow much faster. So the point of this step is to basically blend in the color on her skin, and it gives the skin a very polished and smooth look. Now, whatever you do, try not to get too close to large contrast edges, such as the nose, eyes, or lips, because what happens if you get too close to it, the color on those areas will start to bleed into the rest of the skin. So you just want to be careful when you do your selection, that you are very precise and not getting too close to the edges. So just quickly checking what it looks like before, and it's looking good, and I'm selecting over the hair area. I usually like to also blur it out a little bit, but as you can see, I've put the radius down because I don't want to blur it out too much. And now I'm just going to select areas around her dress and blur that out, just areas where there's a lot of creases that I'd like to smooth out. Okay, so let's look at the before, the frequency separation step, and after. It looks really good. It just smoothed out all the areas that needed polishing. Okay, so that's looking good. Now I'm going to create a layer between the two frequency layers and call that paint. And I will choose a soft brush for this. I will change the opacity to 10% and I'll leave the flow as it is. And the purpose of this step is to even out the colors on her skin and blend them in, just to give it that beautiful polished and smooth look. So I'm sampling the areas and painting as I go, making sure that I sample very close to the area where I'm going to paint on, just so that the colors will be very consistent throughout the skin area. That's really important. Okay, so I look at the before and after, before, after. It's looking really good. Before, after, before, after. Okay, now I'm just going to reduce the opacity on the paint layer and just check my curves. And now create a new layer and call that background cleanup. Now I'm going to clean up some of the creases that are on the backdrop. I'll choose the clone tool and adjust my settings, opacity and flow as I like. Make sure that current and below layer is selected. and start painting over it. Just to smooth it out. Okay, I'll now create a stamp visible layer, which is a merge of all the layers that we have just created, and I'll call that Liquify. I'll go to Filter, Liquify, which opens up the Liquify panel, and that's where I'm going to adjust some of the parts on my model. I like to work on the hair by using the bloat tool, which gives it a nice puffed look, and just bloat the eyes a bit. Fix the lip, and just, adjust the areas that you feel that you want to make more delicate. I love working on hands. I think, especially if you're creating a modern art image or a fine art image, you want to give the hands a lot of attention by making them look so dainty and delicate. Puff the sleeves a bit, and looking good. Press OK. And let's see what it looked like before the Liquify, after the Liquify. Again, before, after. Just a few simple adjustments that make a lot of difference on the image. Okay, so creating a new layer again, and that's where I'm going to pop her eye colors and just make them nice and vivid. I select my brush tool, choose a nice blue color from her dress that I think would look nice on her eyes. I usually like to match the iris color with either the background or with the apparel of the model, and just paint over it with a nice soft small brush. You can adjust the opacity and the flow as you like. That's not really a big problem, because you can always also, once you're done, adjust the opacity of the layer itself. And adding a hint of green around her pupil, and I'm going to blend that in. I know it's looking a bit exaggerated at the moment, but once we do change the blending mode and the opacity, it's actually going to look more natural. I'm going to change the blending mode to overlay and just reduce the opacity. So I'm just sampling more of the color in her iris and painting over that. Yep, that looks good. And just look at the before and after, create a new adjustment layer for hue saturation and adjust the sliders as I like. Yep, that's looking nice. And now group both eye layers in one group, call that eyes, and reduce the opacity as desired. I'll create a new layer, rename that whites, as I want to enhance the whites in her eyes. Create an adjustment, curves layer, and just bring out the highlights. Create a mask, invert it, and with a white brush, just paint over the white areas just to brighten them a bit. I'll just look at the before. I think it's a bit too strong. I'm just going to reduce the opacity on it and create another new layer. It's still in the eyes group. I'm just going to clone a few lashes that I want to remove, and just clone in some of the veins in her eyes. And just reduce the opacity. So, as I don't want it to look too exaggerated, I'll create a layer mask just to remove some of the effects I just created so that it won't be too exaggerated. Now, I am going to create two new curves layers. One for the highlights, I'm going to increase that and call that highlight, then invert it. And another one for the shadows, also invert that one. And with a white brush, just paint over the areas, go to shadows. Decrease the opacity of the brush and just paint over all the shadow areas on her face. And I'm going to continue to do that all over the hair and her dress, just to enhance the shadows and bring them out. You can always reduce the opacity of your brush and the size. So that's looking good. I am now going to switch the highlights layer and start working around all the highlighted areas and bring those out. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Now let's look at what it looked like before adding the highlights and before adding the shadows. Yeah, it's looking great. So now I'm just going to create a new curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to just enhance the contrast on the overall look of the image. Now I'm going to create a stamp visible layer. I'll go to Image, Adjustments, and click on the shadows and highlights. Expand this panel and increase and decrease the sliders as you like of the shadows, highlights, and the color correction and the contrast. Now the point of this particular step is just to give the image a more of a high definition look. I feel that it gives it that painterly look that I like in my images. I'll decrease the opacity. I don't want the effect to be too obvious. That's looking good. Now I'll choose the lasso tool. I'm going to draw a selection around her lips and open up a new adjustment, hue saturation layer, and change the color of her lips. Change the blending mode and the opacity. I like to give them a bit of a deeper hue. Now with a brush, a white brush, paint over the edges just to make sure that the color stays within the line of the lips. And I'll just brush a bit over her cheeks and nose to bring out a bit of color into her cheeks and face. Yeah, that looks good. Just bring the opacity down a bit, as I don't want it to look too reddish. I now want to create a vignette around the subject, so I'm going to add a new gradient fill layer. I make sure that radial is selected and work on the opacity. Then I choose a brush and paint it out from my subject. Okay, so now I want to add some texture into my image. I've got 3 selected. I'll just adjust the size to make it fit the canvas, and I'll group them and change that group name into textures, and just change the blending mode for each of those layers. Create a layer mask and paint over the areas that I want to remove the textures of, which is on my subject. Make sure to always remove any texture that's on the skin. Always use a brush with an opacity of 100% so that it can completely remove anything that's on the skin. And sometimes I leave a bit of texture on the dress just to give it an artistic look. Okay, so now I'm just going to go back to my merge layer, select the lasso tool and fix the backdrop because it's a little bit uneven and I don't like the way it looks, so I'm just going to fix that. And what I did was draw a selection around the edge that I would like to change. and paste it into a new layer. I now use my clone tool to clean it up. Just clean around the areas that are uneven and reduce the opacity. Okay, now I'll go back to my texture group and change the blending mode and just brush over the areas that I want to take it out. I brought the gradient fill layer on top as I want the effect to be visible on the texture layers. So now I'll create a new adjustment layer, which is a color balance, and adjust the balance on each of the levels, the midtones, the shadows, and the highlights. Okay, so now I'm happy with the overall tone of the portrait. I'll add a new adjustment layer, hue saturation, and just adjust it to improve the colors even more. Reduce the opacity. Now add a curves layer and increase the contrast to make the image look more dramatic. This way it looks more impactful. Change the blending mode to overlay and reduce the opacity. Okay, I think we're pretty much done. I'll create a stamp visible layer, a merge of all the layers that we have worked on and created, and call that sharpen. Go to filter, sharpen, smart sharpen, and now I'm going to sharpen my image. Adjust it as I like. That looks good. Press OK and reduce the opacity to 50%. Maybe increase it a bit. I think that looks really good. I'm very happy with it. Let's have a look at the before and after. Before all of the effects and after. This is the finished product. And this concludes my tutorial. I really hope you guys have enjoyed watching and have learned new techniques. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.